Good morning. My name is Maurice Crespi. I'm the managing partner of Schindler's Attorneys. Schindler's Attorneys is a co-founder of COBRA. COBRA was formed together with IQ Business and Engaged Business Turnaround. The idea behind COBRA was to form COBRA and to have as many parties, companies join in partnership with COBRA to provide pro bono services to businesses in distress across all disciplines, all professions. So if you require assistance, all that you need to do is send COBRA an email at info@cobra.org.za and we'll respond. We have a war room which deals with your request through a JIRA system. So it gets logged. We have a knowledge base with a bot where you can go in there, ask a question, and it'll give you an answer. All this has been set up to assist. What we also do is we have pro bono Zoom sessions with you and your team, or with you and your employees if need be. We can take them through a process. We can provide guidance to you, and we mediate between creditors by asking them to come into the ecosystem and call upon them to then get their creditors to come in and to strike arrangements between the debtors and creditors all the way up the ladder to the banking level. As part of the pro bono service, we offer these webinars. We broadcast them every day. In fact, we got two tomorrow. And today we are joined by Carl Bates, the CEO of the Sirdar Group. He's going to be presenting on your crisis, your board, your assumptions. So at COBRA, we provide advice. We had Gigi Alcock on. He provides advice at the SPASA, at the very, very low level of businesses, the informal sector of businesses. And we're in that space all the way up to businesses, large businesses, where we provide advice to boards of large companies. And this is where the Sirdar Group fit in. They're providing that advice. They've been absolutely fantastic as a partner. This is not the first time that Carl's been on, so we're indebted to him. Thank you, Carl. Just a bit about Carl. He's a global entrepreneur, speaker, author, mentor, director, and dynamic thought leader. He's an international expert on business growth and the education and implementation of governance for SMEs and privately held companies. Carl is an experienced chairman and independent director with deep insight into the operation of companies and how they can create long-term value for shareholders and other stakeholders, inspire their teams, and deliver effectively for clients. As founder and chief executive of the Sirdar Group, Sirdar Global Group, he is world-renowned for his practical understanding of governance and is constantly invited to share his knowledge and insights on the subject. He's a chartered accountant and a member of the Institute of Directors of both New Zealand and South Africa. We're indebted to you. Thanks so much, Carl. Over to you.
Thanks so much, and thanks again for the opportunity to share and support all of you who are listening today in the journey that you're going through these turbulent times. As Maurice has introduced, at the Sirdar Group, we're a leader in the education, the appointment, and guidance of high-performance boards, particularly for privately held companies and family businesses, although we do work across the public sector and listed as well. And I think through that activity, we've had the real opportunity to see the complete array of business activity during COVID-19. And I think when we go into conversations about COVID-19, when we go into conversations like this one we're having today about how we respond and what we're doing and where business is at, there often tends to be a significant element of that sort of pre-thinking about a webinar like this, that it's going to be about how business is failing and how business isn't performing. And I think it's really important for us to understand that across the spectrum of businesses, there are businesses from the one end that are bankrupt to the other end where they're making significant strides and growing through this crisis. And lucky enough, myself, and blessed enough to be involved in a couple of businesses actually that have had a really positive response to the COVID-19 pandemic and been able to leverage work that they've done in periods leading up to this pandemic to be a beneficiary of growth and development during this time and find ways to put that back and support communities through this time. And so I want to give you that framing at the start of this conversation to ensure that as we talk about your assumptions and this crisis, that there is an opportunity for business to benefit and grow through this. If you think about your assumptions, what the crisis means to you, and how as a business you're responding effectively. And really that's what today is all about. At the Sirdar Group, just like when you're climbing a mountain, we like the conversation to be practical, we like it to be applicable, and most importantly, we expect it to be value-adding. Because I could give you an hour webinar on the theory of directors. I could give you an hour conversation about the theory of how boards should respond in times like these. But that doesn't actually help you do something right now to ensure your business is in a better position than it otherwise would have been. And I think that's a really important framing, a better position than it otherwise would have been if you hadn't engaged, or if you hadn't talked through, if you hadn't listened and learned through this talk that we're doing this morning. So it's not that every business is going to be successful as a result, but it's that you're going to be in a better position than you otherwise would have been by applying the logic that we're talking about today. So really, I want to just talk about this idea of your crisis, because for each of us, this crisis is personal. This crisis obviously has an economic and a country and a global impact. And we know that. We're hearing about that in the media every day. What I want to focus on is what it means for you. What is your crisis? What is it looking like in your business? What is it meaning for you in terms of opportunities and challenges? What are the threats to business sustainability? And what are the things that if you leverage now will create better and stronger sustainability for you as a business through this journey? And so as we talk about this, talk about it in a first person context. What does this mean for your business? What does this mean for you? What does this mean for the companies that you're involved in leading, whether it be at a management level or in your role as a director? And at that point in the conversation, I want to remind you of this idea that we talk about at the Sirdar Group, that good directors grow companies, but ultimately great directors change lives. And I've seen some examples of great directors through this process who have really engaged in the businesses that they're involved in, who have engaged in the teams that they're leading, and made sure that they're demonstrating through this crisis great leadership, and understand that the way they deliver the messages the tough messages they've got to deliver sometimes, the messages that maybe more have more opportunity, have more hope within their business, that they're all delivered with the leadership style, the values of their business truly coming through. And I think if I give you one disappointment and one great outcome that I've seen through the COVID-19 crisis, it's been the way businesses have either truly demonstrated their values through this journey, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, or have blatantly thrown their values out the window, have essentially ignored their values as a way or during the way in which they've responded to the challenges they face. And I'm not suggesting that the challenges aren't great. For some businesses, this is total annihilation, and there's not much any webinar that I could give or any of my colleagues could give are going to change that. You know, if you're in international travel right now and you're flying a plane, or we're flying a plane from South Africa to Australia, and I simply use that example because this morning it was announced that Qantas have grounded its 747 fleet. Now, the 747 is the plane that flies between Sydney and Johannesburg. And just to put that in context, the 747 is the only plane that can fly from Sydney to Johannesburg in one flight currently because of the international regulations about the number of engines required when you fly over a large body of water. So it's interesting when you think about that impact and what that means for anyone who was an expert, a Qantas, a captain of a 747. That fundamentally changes the outlook of that business. The question is, how have they gone about doing that? And I'm not going to comment specifically on Qantas, but I know that for each of us, our businesses have a position, they have a value set, and the challenge for you is, are you living that value set? Are you using that value set? Are you demonstrating true leadership through this journey? And I think the moment that I really realized that and saw how powerful that, luckily for me, was right at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis. And it was actually, funnily enough, when I'd just landed back from Australia. I'd got off a 747 at the beginning of March. I'd been in Sydney and Australia with a client of ours. We're involved in managing a board of directors in Australia. I happen to be a non-executive director of this board. And I'd been in Australia for a couple of days, had a wonderful opportunity actually to spend the weekend with my brother in Sydney. He'd flown over from New Zealand. And I flew back to South Africa and I said, guys, COVID-19 is going to hit South Africa and this country is going to be shut down. And a couple of my team sort of said, Carl, you're nuts, but let's talk about this. And we talked about it. And as a result, we made some decisions about how we're going to run our business. And then about 2 weeks later, we were talking about, do we close our offices? And one of the values of the Sirdar Group is being a step ahead. And so we're having this conversation as a leadership team about, do we close our offices? And one of our leadership team said, guys, one of our values has been a step ahead. If we don't close our offices before the president announces a lockdown, we're not being a step ahead. And so funnily enough, that was the decision that day. We closed our offices. And it was interesting to see the response of our team and our clients in recognizing that value and being able to reflect back to us that we'd lived that value. And so the first message I want you to take from this morning is, what are the value sets of your business? And how are those value sets being seen in the assumptions you're making and the way in which you're making decisions and communicating them? And through that process, are you truly being a director that is enabling people to change lives, to have a positive impact on people's lives through this process? So with that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about your board. And you might go, Carl, I'm on this call and I'm one director. And look, if you're one director, I'd love to get a sense through the chat group. If you're one director, if you have other directors on your board, please just put a message in the chat box and say, hey, Carl, I'm the only director of my company, or I've got 5 directors. Just give me a sense so I can give you some direction, some real value through this process. So put that in the chat box, or if you're watching us live on Facebook, put that in the Facebook chat and the guys will share that with me as well. The question is whether you are one director or there's multiple directors that serve your board. Understanding your role and how you execute it will make the difference to your success, and I'll put in brackets there, or failure. The key to the approach for you as a director right now is not necessarily the decisions you make. No one's expecting every director to get this right, and not every director will. I think let's be honest, let's understand the reality of the world. Not every director is going to make the right decisions through this process, and we can't expect that they will, and we can't expect that you will. But your accountability in executing it, as I'm going to talk a little bit about now, is not the decision you make, but it's the process you follow to make that decision. And so we'll talk about how you make sure that you document that. Ultimately, your role as a director, ultimately your governance role is concerned with holding the balance between these economic and social goals and individual and communal goals in balance. And I think if we think about what COVID-19 is doing to our businesses and the tough decisions, I'm not suggesting at all that we've got easy decisions to make as directors, tough decisions we have to make that impact the lives of a whole lot of people. The critical thing for our businesses is holding this balance between economic and social. Do we delay paying that dividend? Because right now we need to invest that profit that we made last year, or the profit we made in the first quarter, into holding our staff and keeping them in a job for when we're going to be able to be back at full capacity. Or is our business one of those businesses? Is our business a 747 that has to be retired? And we have to go through a process a bit like what we're supporting you here at COBRA to do, to effectively retire your 747 so you can work out what it is next that you're going to do with both your capital at the end of that retirement of that aeroplane, or that metaphorical aeroplane, or the retirement of the capital that you've been using there. With all of this in mind, it is extensively recognized globally that governance increases your bottom line and the financial results achieved for shareholders and for other stakeholders. And I think the key in the message here is what this means is all of the research says through effective governance, you will achieve higher financial results for shareholders and other stakeholders. In a COVID-19 environment, that might mean relative to what you would have lost. So instead of losing R1 million, you lose R500 million. Or instead of losing R1 billion, you're losing R500 million. Because you've got those extra minds, those extra challenges, you've got those questions. You've got those questions being asked of you that no one else was prepared to ask you, because no one else has the willingness to front up to you as the founder of the business and say, actually, you're wrong. Actually, you're doing the wrong thing here. You're thinking about yourself. You're not thinking about your employees. You're only thinking about yourself. You're not thinking about the wider business. You're thinking about your employees too much. And if you think about them in the way you're currently thinking, if you just pay them because you think that that's morally the right thing to do, you're not going to have a business that in 6 months' time is able to employ anyone. So when we think about the role of a board is not always just ensuring profitability. Sometimes the role of a board is ensuring that you're losing less money than you would have otherwise. And I think when you think about the context of the crisis, it's an important framing for you in your role as a director, and in thinking about how those that are directors with you are challenging and supporting you or not, how you're fulfilling your role as a director and challenging and supporting others, and maybe ultimately also challenging you to think about who is sitting around the table, who should be sitting around the table, challenging you if you are the only director right now. So with that in mind, I just want to give you a framing of this thing we call in the Sirdar group the 3 hats. The 3 hats is a model that we use for understanding the different roles you play in your business. And I think through this journey and through your assumptions that you're making right now and you'll make into the future, different assumptions are being made wearing different hats. And sometimes we can confuse the hats that we wear when we're making decisions. And it's really important that you understand what hat you're wearing when you both set your assumptions and you make decisions through this crisis. By the way, this idea, the 3 hats, comes from something we call the law of 3 hats, which comes from a book I wrote called The Laws of Extreme Business Success. Funnily enough, to think about the 747 story again, I wrote this book on the Qantas 747s over a couple of trips backwards and forwards during 2008, 2009. I did the trip 15 times in 18 months. And I used those flights to write the book, The Laws of Extreme Business Success. There is a short version, an ebook, which we will share with you complimentary at the end of this webinar. So if you'd like a complimentary copy of The Laws of Extreme Business Success ebook, just put in the chat box, complimentary ebook, or email me, carlbates@thesirdgroup.com, and I will share a complimentary copy of that ebook with you, which is where this little story comes from. So the law of three hats splits the hats into your three key hats of shareholder, director, manager. And the important thing to see here is your hat of shareholder and your hat of manager don't overlay. The only overlay is with the hat of a director. You might wear all three of these hats. All three of these hats might be hats that you currently wear. But that doesn't mean you get to make a decision because you're the owner, or you're the entrepreneur, or you're the founder. You only get to make decisions wearing the relevant hat. Your hat as a shareholder is about investing for a return. And wearing your shareholder hat in your business right now, you should be thinking about your investment. What is the investment I have in this business? And if it requires more money, am I prepared to put more money in order for a return on investment in the future? Or am I putting money down a black hole? And if you're putting money down a black hole, maybe that's a conversation you should be having with the COBRA team around how you're protecting the investment that you've made, or through a business rescue process, protecting any further investment you make into the business. The second hat is the hat you wear as a director. The hat you wear as a director is all about championing the promise. It's all about the role that you play as a director of this legal entity called a company. And it's really important to understand that as a director, you are only accountable and responsible to the company and through the company to shareholders and other stakeholders. You are not accountable or responsible directly to shareholders for the decisions you make. And shareholders can't instruct you to follow particular outcomes or journeys or processes or decisions that they may want to be made. So it's important to understand that distinction. And then lastly, of course, the hat is a manager, which is where you operationally bring this to life. So the hat of a manager is all about the role that you play as a manager in your journey of bringing the promise to life. So this whole webinar is about this idea of your assumptions. So we've talked about this crisis that you're in, and it can impact you in different ways. We've talked about the fact that you've got different hats you're wearing through this crisis, and now we're talking about your assumptions. And it's important that we understand on a daily basis, we are supporting and advising boards regarding the assumptions that they're making. And when I say we, I'm talking about us at the Sirdar Group. And some of these directors are making them consciously, some of them are making them with just on the fly. Some of them are not even thinking about it. Some of the directors we're dealing with don't want to be told that they're making assumptions that are unreasonable or unfair. And I suppose when you're climbing a mountain, part of the role of a Sirdar, the lead Sherpa, the person who guides you to the summit, is to tell you if you take that next step, you are going to die. And of course, no one likes to hear that. So it's really important that you understand consciously the assumptions that you're making, because if you're not consciously making these or understanding your assumptions, the decisions you make become a lot more difficult because you don't know the reference point for the decisions that you're making. So these assumptions will ultimately determine your success or your failure. And the question for you is, do you truly understand the assumptions that you are making? Are you really conscious of the assumptions that you're making in your business? Just like climbing a mountain, there's a statement here that says, it is the preparation at base camp, not during the climb, that gets you to the summit. And so my question for you is, in this journey of responding to this crisis, what is your summit? I've spoken to a whole lot of people who have said during this journey, during this crisis, they say things like, well, we don't know where this is going, so we're just working through it and we'll get somewhere. Look, I know COVID-19 is unexpected and is this first time it's happened, and all this stuff. But I think sometimes we overdo the this has never happened before story. And there's one saying that I really love, and I would ask you to pick up your pen right now and write this down. So pick up your pen and write this down. There is no such thing as an original mistake. So write this down. There's no such thing as an original mistake. So stop trying to make one. And you might say, Carl, you're mad. This is a global pandemic. This has never happened before. This hasn't closed the world like it has before. It hasn't fundamentally stuffed up retail like ever before in history. And I go, well, actually it has. I'm reading a book right now. There's an author that's wrote a series of books about different cities around the world: London, Paris, Russia. Well, Russia is a country as opposed to a city, and there's one on New York about the story of the cities over an extended period. And they're great sort of historical novels, and I love historical novels. And they sort of tell the journey. And it's interesting when you read history, how much you see about what's happened around the world over a long period of time. And I'm reminded of the way my great-grandparents, I was lucky enough when I was born to have 7 of my 8 great-grandparents alive. And so I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time with them and learn a lot from them. And I think about how they responded during the Great War and what they had to do during the Great War in order to survive. When the world was closed, when borders were closed, when no one had an idea of what was going to happen and when it was going to end. And so the point I'm making to you is determine what is your summit. And so at the Sirdar group, when we had those discussions back in March, we set the 30th of September as our summit. And we said, we've got to get to the 30th of September. Now, I have no doubt that we're going to get to the 30th of September, and then we're going to have to set another summit. Then we're going to have to choose another mountain. But at least our team know that we've got a summit. We've got a journey that we're on right now. We've got an endpoint for this part of our climb. What's your endpoint? What's the journey for you that is that endpoint? And then what are the assumptions you're making? And an interesting challenge for you as leaders, and I've challenged a couple of managing directors about this over the course of the last couple of months. I've had a lot of managing directors as I've talked to them about how they're engaging their boards, and they'll say things like, well, I'm doing this. This is what I think is going to happen. These are the assumptions I'm making. And I had a very personal example of this, where I sat down with my leadership team back in March, and I said, guys, these are the assumptions I'm making. And I had 4 key assumptions. And one of my leadership team said, Carl, that's all very well and good. But for us to get to the 30th of September, we need to make these our assumptions, not your assumptions. And so my challenge to each of you, as you think about this, as you think about your assumptions, how do you drop that why off the first of it and make it our assumptions? How do you get your leadership team to sign on to a set of assumptions that you're reviewing regularly as a leadership team, as a business, about the journey that you're going on? Everyone in our business knows what our assumptions are. For example, one of our assumptions is we won't go back to face-to-face training until the end of the year. In other words, next year. That's one of our assumptions. Everyone in our business knows that is one of our assumptions. What are your assumptions? And who in your business is aware of those assumptions? It's important to understand that often our assumptions are based on your experiences or our experiences. Often the things that we decide to base our assumptions on are our experiences. And the thing about experiences is, what experiences are you referencing? And are the experiences that you're referencing relevant, or are they no longer relevant? Are you setting assumptions based on something that happened, a reference point last year or the year before or 10 years ago, or even in my example of my great-grandparents, 100 years ago? I get Emma's comment in the chat box there for me about the fact that there are even examples here in South Africa that are much more recent and closer to home. The journey of South Africa through the 80s and 90s. There's great reference points for us to learn from about what it means to be disconnected from the world. But are the experiences that you're referencing relevant, or are they no longer relevant? Because unless you dig into those experiences and consciously make yourself aware, you're not going to be conscious of the basis of the decisions you're making to run your business right now. So ultimately, are you then separating your assumptions out into the right hat? Are you creating a distinction between the assumptions that relate to your role as a shareholder? So for example, an assumption as a shareholder might be that you're assuming you don't have to put any money into the business. Or you're assuming that you do. But that's a shareholder assumption you're making. Wearing your director hat, you might make the assumption that you have access to capital if you need it. But if your shareholder hat says, our assumption is we don't have access to capital, or we're not willing to put money in, whereas your hat as a director says you've got access to capital, those two assumptions don't agree. So what are you going to do about it? So it's really important to separate out the assumptions and understand with those three hats which assumption sits where. Assumptions are a little bit like this picture on the screen, and you might be looking at this going, okay, Carl, like, seriously, what are you trying to tell us here? Well, the interesting thing about this picture is I love this as a sort of metaphor for the journey we're going through right now. The present is the side on the left of your screen there where we're standing there, we're on safe ground. Your assumptions are that ladder, and see how that ladder's tied together. There's a whole lot of aluminium ladders that have been tied together. It moves around. It's not stationary. Your assumptions are going to change. And the future, or your future, is the other side of that crevasse. And it's a bloody scary thing to walk across that crevasse. It's a bloody scary thing to get from the present to the future. And your assumptions are the bridge that get you there. And so when you think about this sort of journey, I love this framing of a partner of mine in the Sirdar group, Roger Hitchcock, when he says, the questions you have to answer are here in the gap. And so my question for you is, what are those questions you're having to answer? What are the questions that you need to answer? In other words, by understanding the questions, you're going to understand the assumptions you have to make. And then you can monitor those assumptions through your journey from the present into the future. And as those assumptions change, as you're forced to change one of the answers to one of those questions because something happens, the market shifts, you're able to shift the view of the future. So in each of our three hats, we have different questions or different assumptions that we've got to answer. We've got different sort of perspectives that we've got to take in this journey. So the assumptions that you're making as a shareholder are all about your role as a shareholder and maybe your role in wearing the hat of other stakeholders. As a director, your assumptions have to be documented. Because if you don't document your assumptions, if you don't document your reference points for the decisions that you make, if the worst happens, if you are liquidated because you haven't been able to navigate that crevice, you haven't been able to climb across that bridge, and you fall into the crevice during this journey, your defense as a director is not about whether or not your decision was the right or the wrong one. Your defense as a director is about the process you followed, the rigor in building that bridge, And if you're not documenting your assumptions, you're not building that bridge and you're not showing there's rigor in your role as being a director. And then ultimately as a manager, your assumptions is all about how are you turning the principles and the decisions into action. What information are you feeding up to your directors and to your shareholders? What are your assumptions as a manager that are flowing through and providing that insight and that input to your board? So your expectations are about your anticipation of what is to come. And so assumptions are based on experiences. Your expectations are about the future. And so while it's about your board, it's about your crisis, it's about your assumptions, the last part of the picture is, what are your true expectations? What are the expectations that you have about what is to come? What are you expecting to happen? What expectations do you have that are emotionally based? What expectations do you have that are not being voiced? Because if you don't understand the expectations you have, you can have the danger of creating this bridge, having assumptions, but expecting that you're going to get there regardless, when the assumptions and the answers to your questions say you're not going to get there. But you still have this expectation driven by emotion that you're going to be successful on the other side. And I think one of the other quotes that I love, and I think this is particularly relevant for entrepreneurs on this call, for people who own their own businesses, and I don't believe the frame owning your own business is correct. That's a whole nother story, but we use it sort of as slang. For those of you who own your own business, here's another quote for you, and I ask you to pick up your pen and write this one down. Your wealth is not what you say yes to. It's what you say no to. Your wealth is not what you say yes to. It is what you say no to. And so the challenge I'm giving to you, and some of you might have picked this up, if you're in a business that frankly isn't going to succeed through this journey, if you're in a business that's not going to successfully get there, your future wealth is going to come because you're prepared to say no now. And you're prepared to put your hand up and have a conversation with the COBRA team and say, guys, I'm not going to get through this. I'm not going to get across this crevasse. I'm not going to get to the other side, and I need to say no now. There is more wealth destroyed, in my view, by directors between the moment they realize they should close their company and the moment they actually do than is ever destroyed before the point that they realize they should close their business. Let me say that to you again. There is more wealth destroyed by entrepreneurs and by directors between the moment the directors realize they should close the business, or they need to business rescue, or they need to liquidate, and the moment they actually go into business rescue or liquidate or sell, then they destroyed before the point they realized that. In other words, we actually realize fairly early on in the game that the end is coming. As my great-grandmother would have said, time is just delaying the inevitable. We realize that fairly early in the game, but so often we leave it a long time before we actually take action and say, yes, I'm ready for business rescue. Yes, I'm ready to liquidate. Yes, I need to sell. Yes, I need to downscale. And the point I'm making to you is that is the bit where you have liability. If you destroy R1 billion in shareholder wealth between those two dates, you are liable for that, and so you should be. If in your private company, you destroy your creditors' funds because 3 months ago you knew, based on your assumptions, that your business should go into business rescue, but you wait till the 1st of August to do it, then you should be liable for the wealth you've destroyed of your creditors. And I often, I'm not trying to get naysay or negative in this conversation. What I'm trying to illustrate for you is the conversation we have around your role as a director and your role as a board is not some theory or some academic view or some university paper on what it means to be a director. It's about being practical, applicable, and value-adding. And I don't need 100 pages in a board pack for you to do this little exercise and work out what those assumptions are. My challenge to you is work out your assumptions, understand your expectations, understand what's being driven by emotion, bring some third-party independence into that conversation. And if you don't have that, and you need that right now today, go onto the COBRA website, fill in the form and say, hey, I need some help. And we'll have that conversation with you. No expectation, no cost. It's part of the pro bono contribution that COBRA is providing to the South African economy. So with that in mind, for those of you who have bigger businesses that are listening to this and you're going, Carl, we really haven't responded to this well. We need to do some more in terms of our thinking about our assumptions and where we're going. I'm giving you, it's on the screen here, these 1 hour agendas that we run through called our COVID-19 boardroom response, where we've actually been working with boardrooms through these modules to work out what their journey is going to be through COVID and post-COVID in order to be successful in the future, in order to understand their assumptions and in order to understand their expectations. If you want to take this agenda and use it in your boardroom, feel free. If you'd love someone to facilitate that conversation, feel free to reach out. I think when we talk about the role of directors, and the role of a board, so often we put this comment on the screen. There is a reason why when we invest in other companies, we expect there to be more than 1 or 2 directors. We inherently know that a board supports a business's growth and increases its value. And so I want to challenge you to think about this and think about, if you are the only director in your particular board, who should be there alongside you? Who is it that actually should be part of your journey in order for you to create that value for your shareholders going forward and into the future? For some, this is going to get nasty. Look, let's not hide behind the reality that clearly understanding your assumptions and your expectations and being able to demonstrate that you did this throughout the process is your key protection. The law in South Africa says, you can't be held accountable for making a bad business decision. You can be held accountable for not following a process in the way in which you come to the conclusion, come to the decision. And so I'm challenging you to be clear about what your assumptions are and to determine them and have a reference point for them that keeps reminding you and your leadership team and your business about the journey that you are going on. A high performance director ultimately brings this together and delivers. And any of you, even if you're the only director in your own business, are a director. For many on this call, you might not just be a director, you may not be a director, you might be an officer. So in South Africa, therefore deemed as essentially a director. You need to apply care, you need to apply skill, and you need to apply diligence. And if you apply care in your approach to decision making by having a set of assumptions, if you apply skill using knowledge, commercial acumen, self-development, and where you acknowledge that you don't have the required skill, bring in someone else for that conversation or that discussion. And where you apply diligence, by taking that little bit of extra time to prepare and have attention to the detail, to set what those assumptions are, to be clear on what they are, to have a model that you're using through this process, you will be able to defend your journey as a director through this very challenging time. So with all of that in mind, I want to give some time to have a little bit of interaction and discussion on this. So I want to ask you, first of all, what has been your biggest insight from today's webinar, your crisis, your board, your crisis, your assumptions? And what are the practical steps, or what is a practical step you are going to take as a result of today? And if you could put that in the chat box or put that in the Facebook chat, and the team will share it with me so I can see those. Love to see what your biggest insights and what the practical steps are that you're going to take as a result of today. And while those are coming through, I'm happy also to take any questions about assumption setting, about expectation setting, or about your role as a director through this journey.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, fire away.
Okay, so the two observations that I've made. The first is you're saying no is the biggest loss of wealth. And the second statement that you made is assumptions, what's on the other side, and that's emotional. Now, what's interesting about those two statements is that they are quite tied, the point you're making, quite tied to cognitive biases in psychology. And I just thought I'd point it out because it's really interesting. So when it comes to assumptions and what's on the other side, what comes in there is a confirmation bias, where you just want to, you say, it'll be okay, restaurants will open, okay? And then what you'll do is the confirmation bias will kick in, and you'll find every data point that actually supports that position. So that's something to always look out for. Is a cognitive bias coming into play? And the second one, which relates to your statement, not saying no is the biggest loss of wealth, is actually known as the sunken cost fallacy. I don't know if you've come across it. No. And the sunken cost fallacy is in fact regarded as one of the biggest leaders to loss. And they've done studies on the sunken cost fallacy. And the sunken cost fallacy is basically, I've put so much money into it, despite me knowing that I'm going to lose, or knowing reasonably that I'm going to lose out, I still spend money. You see it in poker, where you know you're going to lose the hand, but you've got so much money invested, you just actually go for it and you lose out. And it actually, they've gone so far as to actually find that the sunken cost fallacy, or the desires that relate to it, even apply to mice. They've done those studies. So another bias to look out for, which you've touched on, is the sunken cost bias or fallacy, which relates directly to your statement, not saying no is the biggest loss of wealth. So spot on.
And I think you make two really interesting points. Obviously, as an accountant, the sunken cost is a big reference point in project decision making and investment, and understand entirely, and agree with you there. I think your assumption comment comes back to, and confirmation bias comes back to the importance of having those third party, in our view, independent directors who are there to go, you need to think about this. You've done a model that says if restaurants open, you're going to be okay. But what if they don't? How long have we got before we can make the call on whether or not we need to make a bigger decision here? What is our capital runway? Is that a realistic assumption? And I think that's where that critical third party, you've got no one in your life and business, and this is for all of you who are directors, who are managing directors, chief executives listening right now. If you've got no one in your life who's telling you you're wrong, then you've got no one who's actually helping you. Because you need that person, you need that someone who's saying you're wrong to provide that counterbalance and that challenge. Any other questions?
I seem to recall I read in a book that a company, a director who wrote a book due to his success, he recorded that what he did is he actually planted a director whose sole job was to disagree with the board and to make out a case as to why resolutions ought not be passed. And he did it for that reason. And I think that's exactly it, spot on. Seek that independent advice, because these cognitive biases come into play, and just checking in with the third party will shed light on whether you're actually being misled by yourself. I don't see any further questions. I
think your comment just on having that practical reference point and challenge is part of what COBRA is all about as well. Is anyone who's listening being able to come and say, I'm not sure where I'm at. This is the information. Give me a view. And we will quickly, wearing the COBRA hat, give you a view of, is this something we need to take further? Is this something that you've got to take drastic action? Or, is this something that, we can monitor and every now and then come in for a checkup, but keep doing what you're doing?
Yeah, certainly. That's exactly what COBRA is about. And I mean, you make a perfect point. You go to COBRA just for second advice, a second opinion. I mean, you do that when it comes to medical advice. You go for a second opinion. So go for a second opinion in relation to your own assumptions. Check them out. As you would go for a second opinion in relation to a professional advice that you receive. Yeah, so
and what's interesting for most people is you will be more emotional if it's your own business. You'll be more emotional about the decisions you make about your own business than you will be about even decisions about choosing the babysitter for your baby the first time you have to do that.
Yeah, a whole different mental system actually kicks in, and that's actually where the biases kick in. That's the moment you start feeling any degree of emotion, that's when you really have to check yourself. No, fantastic. I think that's pretty much a wrap, Carl.
Right.
Yeah, thanks so much to Carl, group, and to my panelists, and in particular to the attendees, the Facebook audience. Thanks for that, and to the YouTube audience. Hope you guys have enjoyed today. Please email COBRA, info@cobra.org.za if you need anything, if you need any particular advice, or go to the website, take advantage of the knowledge base. It gets updated regularly, and we check for fake news. So whatever you see there, it's real. You can get your second opinion from COBRA's knowledge base. So thanks, everyone. Thanks, Carl. Thanks to the attendees. Bye for now.
Cheers. Bye.